So I'm sitting here just getting some work done, and I'm working on some of this tablature that I was talking about in yesterday's video. And I was reminded of something that happened a couple years ago that I think about all the time. And it's something that really changed the way that I think about Scruggs style or the playing of Earl Scruggs, or really just what it means to learn the language of a specific player or a specific genre. Because if you're interested in bluegrass banjo, then you've probably noticed that different players do things a little bit differently. Earl Scruggs did things a certain way, and J.D. Crowe does them slightly differently, and Jim Mills does them slightly differently, and Bela Fleck does a lot of things really differently from all of those people. But everyone's just got a slightly different way that they approach the same things. We play a lot of the same tunes, like Shuckin' the Corn or even Foggy Mountain Breakdown. But if you listen to a bunch of different players play that tune, you're going to hear them do a lot of different, really subtly different things. Anyway, what happened was I was at a festival probably 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, and I won't tell exactly who this was. It's not a particularly scandalous story, but they would probably prefer that I didn't say who this was. There's a banjo player that I really respect, and especially when it comes to the playing of Earl Scruggs, he's someone that I can talk to and ask questions and learn a lot about the style. So backstage, and I say, hey man, can I show you this thing that I figured out, this Earl Scruggs thing? Can you tell me if this is really how he played this? And he says, sure. So I sit down with the banjo and I play something, and I try to play it as well as I can, try to play it the way that I remember it, the way I learned it off the record. I just learned it by ear, and I just said, what do you think? Is that it? And his response was this. And I thought for a second, maybe this was just totally wrong. Maybe I was really annoying him at this point. I'm not really close friends with this guy, so maybe I just got on his nerves, and that was just the end of it. He didn't want to talk anymore, and he was just like, get out of here, we're done. And so we just kind of sat there for like 5 or 10 seconds. It felt like a really long time. And he's still just holding this up, and just with every ounce of his being, it seemed to me saying, wrong, terrible, go away, something like that. Finally, he said this: you're playing too many hammer-ons. Those aren't hammer-ons, you have to slide. You have to slide with your middle finger. Turns out it was actually a joke, and it was pretty funny. Now looking back at it, it's really funny, but it's something that I still think about all the time because it exposed a huge misunderstanding that I had about Earl Scruggs' playing. And it's not like this is just like the most groundbreaking discovery, whether you play a hammer-on or a slide, that's not going to change your life. It's not like these are just like two completely different things that are just unrelated to each other. It's not like if I play something like this as a hammer-on, or I play it as a slide, they're not worlds apart. It's not like it's two completely unrelated things that are happening there. But what I do find important about that is that it makes a small difference. It makes a subtle difference. And if you're interested in bluegrass and the banjo, then you're going to want to invest in an interest in subtlety, because a lot of the things that Earl Scruggs does are incredibly subtle, and that's why it's kind of so magical, right? He's not playing a lot of notes. He's playing simple melodies. There's only 3 chords in a lot of these songs, so a lot of the value are in the tiny little details. And so as an example, if you study someone like J.D. Crowe, then you're probably going to play a lot more hammer-ons because that's something that he did, and that's part of his sound. It sounds a certain way. But if you really study Earl Scruggs, like really specifically his actual playing, not just his tunes or other people playing his tunes, then you'll probably do more slides in that kind of instance because it's just what he did. Who knows what you're going to do in your musical life after that? It's not really about just playing exactly what somebody else played. It's just about learning that language, right? Well, while you're learning that language, you might as well do it really carefully and look at all the details. And what was clear to me after this incident with this banjo player was that I really wasn't looking at the details. I wasn't watching videos closely enough. I wasn't listening closely enough. I wasn't watching when this banjo player played because he was clearly so influenced by Earl that that's actually a pretty good source for what Earl did. So now I try to be a little bit more careful when I try to transcribe things or learn things from people, not so that I can do it exactly like them, but so that I can understand what it is about what they're doing that makes it sound that way. The little differences, like a hammer-on versus a slide, do make a small difference. And as long as I'm playing something like Cripple Creek, which is a pretty simple melody, it's a pretty simple tune, I might as well invest in these little details that actually make it sound kind of different from every other way that people play them. And of course, this is coming from someone who looks at all this stuff from the perspective of wanting to amass a ton of information that you can kind of sort through and learn from. Not everybody wants to do that. You don't actually have to find a player that you want to emulate and study and, think of as kind of your musical inspiration. You don't have to do that. That just happens to be what I've always enjoyed doing. I've gotten a lot of value out of that sort of thing. And since I do a lot of that stuff, it translates into the work that I do, meaning the stuff that I teach people and the stuff that I put online is usually a representation of that. It's usually the way that I think about how to actually play this stuff that ends up in the tablature and in the videos, which then I'm showing to you if that's the kind of thing that you're interested in. And so one of the things that I'm doing now is going through some of this old tablature that I wrote a couple of years ago that doesn't have a lot of the details that I think it should have, like right hand fingerings and more accurate hammer-ons and pull-offs. Whereas the way that I'm writing it now, hopefully I can skim through it, make sure that it has the right hand fingerings, but also make sure the hammer-ons and the slides are in the right place and any other detail that I think is important, because I often tell people that the details are important, but if I don't actually share that in the content that I make, then, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So what does this potentially mean for you? Well, it could mean a lot of things. It could mean that you actually want to spend a lot of time thinking about hammer-ons versus slides and when to use them. That's something to consider, I suppose. But I think the larger thing is just to listen really carefully to the music that you're interested in and look really carefully at the resources you're using to learn it and figure out whether or not it's capturing the stuff that you find really interesting about that music. And again, that doesn't mean that any of this content necessarily has to be from someone who played something a certain way and now you want to learn it just that way. It's more about thinking about what are the little details about the music that you want to learn that you can hone in on and improve. Because things like playing the right notes, playing the right chords, that's actually not that hard. It's the little details that make music more interesting that can be a little bit difficult to practice sometimes. Partially because we don't really think about them as often. And in the case of the story I just told, I really wasn't thinking about it enough at the time, at least not on the level of the players that I really respect. So I found that both inspiring, interesting, and also kind of funny. And I hope that you found it entertaining or funny or maybe even educational in some way as well, if that's possible. But for now, that's all the details that I care to share in this video. So that's going to do it for this one. I'll see you next time.